Okay. So this is a really exciting time when the university, and this is happening across the nation, and we like to think that we're leaders in this movement to go beyond the boundaries of disciplines and see connections. And the arts are a really, really important vehicle for this. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. And what I like to do is, as a practicing musician, but I'm also a theorist, I actually have a book that my publisher is always getting on me to say, you have to be more aggressive about pushing your book and everything. And so I'm just going to pass this around. You can take a look at that. And what I do is I make music. I happen to be a musician and an improvising and composing musician. I record and involved in that kind of thing. But I also, and this is a sort of a unique combination, I actually write about the creative process and inner dimensions of the creative process, and I've come up with some unique ideas on that. And it's a little bit of a challenge, kind of keeping, as we say, keeping our chops in shape, but then also, kind of meeting the deadlines of publishers. That can get intense. But when you're on top of it, it's kind of fun in a way, because the thinking and reflecting and writing and articulating about the creative process opens up ways of understanding and even experiencing the creative process, and then that in turn fuels the analytical process too. So these things work together. It's kind of a neat little thing. And my sense is that this is going to be more and more the kind of activity in the 21st century that practitioners across fields are going to be into. Not only being an expert practitioner in the field, but actually being somebody that articulates the process, the details of the process and the inner workings. So I'm gonna let's do a little music. I'm just gonna play a little bit, and then I'm gonna actually ask you. This will be somewhat interactive. I want to ask you sort of what's happening and what you think is like. Just reflect a little bit about what you're hearing and what you think is going on. I'm just making some things up here. Now I will turn off the microphone. As an obedient improviser, learning. Let's see, here we go. From here until eternity. So, but also reflect on this not only from the standpoint of what you think it might be like to be a musician, but also a practitioner in your particular discipline. How might what you just heard relate to your field? Anybody have any thoughts on on that kind of connection. You have somebody who has some expertise in a given area, and it's a kind of performance. So performance is something that happens not only on the concert stage, but also basically every field is a form involves a kind of performance. So anybody have any thoughts on connecting principles? Things that might, yeah.
Well, as sort of a basic musician, doesn't there have to be some structure involved in improvisation before you just go off and play random? You have to have some thought process behind the cohesion of the tonality.
Okay, that's a really that's a profound statement that I'm going to come back to in a second, because there's kind of there's different layers of an answer. So that's a great question. Whenever you have a question that's like, well, it's yes and no, but it's like, yeah, I love that.
I was actually going to say something similar to that, but you're talking about connecting it to different professions. So you are doing performance, and you know how to play your instrument and how to do well in your particular field, but then with the idea of improvisation, where you sort of are going forward and being creative with it, it's actually very similar to that, where I think it's interesting that you have sort of a basic knowledge and then you're riffing.
Okay, great. And now, just to go back to this first question, because I love this question, so I can't let it go. And I'm going to try to do this without getting on a detour. There's an improvisatory aspect to all disciplines, even science, even mathematics, even classroom teaching and courtroom law, and virtually every athletics and sociology and anthropology and philosophy, in the sense that in a given moment, you're coming into that moment with the conditioned body of knowledge. And this is conditioning. It can be limiting, but it also can be, obviously it's a necessity, and I'll talk about it in a second. So in that moment, you are actually imposing a structure that you're improvising with. Now, so you're a little bit conversant with music, I can tell. And so in an idiom like jazz, you actually have given to you a chord sequence that you will improvise on top of, and I think that's what you're talking about. But there's also many situations in different disciplines where the structure kind of arises on a moment-to-moment basis. It's not necessarily given, it's not necessarily preordained, at least in full form. And so what we need to do is be able to kind of determine what the structure is, and then create within it, but also recreate it as we go. And that's where the real creative innovation happens. So I think of this, I have this phrase that I use called the artist paradox. And the artist paradox is just this very thing. It's the interplay, it's the apparent contradiction between the need for expertise in a field. So there's a lot of talk about the football team now, okay? So even at its worst, the level of expertise that every single one of those players and coaches and athletic director need to even walk in the door is really, really high. They've really had to log some time. And as musicians, we know we have to log time in the practice room. It just is the nature of the field. Every field has that. In some fields, it's more vivid, you might say. Now, at the same time, this comes. Okay, so this is an absolute necessity. You cannot go beyond. You can't get through without really practicing. All right, so we know that. With that comes a little bit of a price tag, in a sense, and that is, well, what is that? Okay, what is the limitation of this thing? That's why it's a paradox. It's absolutely necessary, but it's also limiting in what way?
Well, in one sense, if you limit the art form to people who have practiced, then you're cutting off the entire rest of the population. population. And in addition to that, when you practice, you learn a structure, and then that sort of narrows your creative focus to a sort of pre-described pattern.
Yeah, and this is the second point that really hits it, is that inherent in repetition is conditioning. And this is how humans learn. We learn by repeating. But inherent in that, then we're prone to conditioned response. So that means that in any given situation, so we encounter a situation, it'll elicit tendencies to replicate what we've learned to do. And the profoundly creative individual can do what? They can transcend conditioning. Now, the question is it possible to totally transcend conditioning? It doesn't really matter. Let's just say the answer is yes, or the answer is no. We can't totally transcend our conditioning. Well, then the question is, can we transcend partially our conditioning? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And once we establish that, then the fact is that we can actually become more creative with a kind of awareness that lets us do this. So we have this thing called the artist paradox. It's the paradox between the need for repetition, repetitive practice to gain expertise, and the need to transcend the very thing that we needed. It's like an endless cycle of need. And the solution to the paradox is to enliven a state of awareness that is more expansive than our ordinary kind of consciousness. So you hear artists, and you hear scientists. How many people are majoring in a science-related field? Okay, so actually it looks like over half. All right, so we hear profound practitioners across fields, but quite notably in the arts, but some in the sciences too, of these exalted states during the peak performance. I am experiencing a deeper connection with myself, a deeper connection with my surroundings, a deeper sense of self, a deeper sense of clarity, extraordinary clarity. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson, he described this state as it's a transcendent state. He described it as the clearest of the clear, the surest of the sure, meaning that it was a state of profound, it's like you didn't have to, in terms of the knowledge of what was being perceived, there was no need for confirmation. It's sometimes called a noetic experience, N-O-E-T-I-C. William James wrote about this. So this is a state in which we are, even if it's not possible to totally transcend our conditioning, we can make significant strides in that direction. And this state entails access to a kind of consciousness that underlies all fields. And in my view, this is going to be the future of education is going to be contacting this unifying field of consciousness and then actually reconstructing itself from this standpoint. And this is where the arts, so if you look at the history of education, especially say in recent centuries, I think it's safe to say that education is science dominated. You could even say artistic fields are science dominated. And I'll talk about improvisation in a second, which has a very curious history in musical study. And what we're seeing now in recent decades is the emergence of the arts coming in. So now we have the Arts Engine program here. We have the esteemed director of the program in our midst. So one cannot direct a program and be immune to public acknowledgement. And this is happening. There's an arts wave happening. And science is realizing that. I don't know if they totally realize what they're getting into, but science is hippening. It's like the arts are cool. Yeah, we like the arts and all this kind of stuff. Oh, don't speak so soon because the arts are actually delivering something that science needs, and the arts need science too. But the arts are coming in with contact. They're poking at this underlying ground. They're like penetrating to. It's like drilling. Getting further to it. And then there's even a more, what you might say, the consciousness wave that's happening in higher education. So there's two strands of this wave. One is the contemplative studies wave. And these are very radical. These are way more radical than arts. And so somebody like me, I've got my hands in all these things. So the contemplative studies wave actually involves bringing meditation practices into university classrooms. to, again, get at this inner experience like this. And so, how many people have taken a class at the university, credit-bearing class that involves meditation practice? You're actually sitting in meditation during the class. Okay. So this is radical. Okay, but it's happening. We actually have a number. I actually teach a class, and we have there's probably, to my knowledge, 7 or 8 people across campus. So be on the lookout if this intrigues you. Be on the lookout for this kind of thing. So you have, and this is a national movement, the contemplative studies movement. Some of you may have seen that Leah connected you to the link on our contemplative studies curriculum. So it was actually the first curriculum in the country at a public institution to have a meditation component, and that was put in 2000. And then there's also a consciousness studies movement. Now, the consciousness studies is interesting because it's coming more. It's sort of driven by the same quest to kind of get at this inner underlying ground, but it's coming at it from more of a research standpoint. So again, now here is where, the contemplative studies movement is actually driven by, this has its roots in mystical or spiritual traditions, or you might even say religious traditions. But we have to be very careful of stripping away those kinds of things because of church-state boundaries and all that. It's a very interesting topic in itself. The consciousness studies movement is driven by science. So then, it's locked into notions that human consciousness is largely a neurobiological phenomenon. And one of the exciting things, but again, this is the artist's paradox. Neuroscience. I say, no, you talk about a buzzword. Okay, neuroscience is like one of the hottest buzzwords. Like if you want to impress somebody, you're at a party and you kind of like, you're at a loss now. And it's like you want to somehow impress this person, find a way to put neuroscience in there. It's like, so it's like, even if it's like, I know a neuroscientist, or something, or I thought about it once, or I looked it up in the whatever. I mean, and so neuroscience has succumbed to they're unable to, this is a personal opinion, and it's very, like if this were a room of neuroscientists, I would still say this, but I'd probably frame it differently, or maybe wait until later, or wait till drinks at the bar or something like that. But the neuroscience has failed to resolve the artist's paradox, because what they've done is they've started to discover profound connections, and this is totally right on, between subjective experience, not all subjective experience, but they think that they're going to have it all, and the machinery of the brain. Okay, and that's very cool. And they're getting very excited about this, as they should. And they've taken a step, though, that it's a leap that they're not qualified to take. And I'm generalizing about the field, because not all neuroscientists, and I'm looking around now, and some of you are kind of like on with this and smiling, and some of you are going, wait a minute now. It's like, and the leap is when it's a strong movement within neuroscience to explain consciousness only in terms of the neurobiology. And this is, and I tell you this, and if you were on neuro people, I would say this, it's going to come crashing down so fiercely. So Francis Crick, okay, so he's like one of the heroes in terms of DNA fame and everything like that. Is he still alive? I think he might have passed away a couple of years ago. But his statement, your joys, your anxieties, your feelings of transcendence, of love, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I don't remember exactly, something like this, all of your subjective experience are nothing but the activity of neurons. You are nothing but a pack of neurons. That's all the human being is. So any dimension of the human being that's transcendent, like the notion of soul, the notion of some kind of dimension of spirit, is illusion according to that paradigm. Now, if you're in the scientific community, and say you're pre-med or something like that, or you're like really on that track, you're getting messages that science is the way and the truth and the light, and it has it's like it is the only pathway to understanding the human, the cosmos. You're going to be getting that big time, and so this is conditioning. So now there's probably people in this room, okay, and you need to stick to your guns, but you also have to examine a couple of things. There's probably people in this room that are, this is most likely a microcosm of the bigger, academic world, that say, well, I mean, that's right. We are in the age of science. Science knows. Science will disprove, when it comes down to it, science will disprove spirituality and religion and mysticism and all this kind of thing, because it has the tools to do that. It's got a system. It's like impeccable. All right. And there's so many ways of going into this, but here's one way to go into this. Okay, and we're going to go into it through the lens of science itself. And this is like, okay, the science, epistemology of science, methodology of science, is a big part of your class. So at the University of Virginia happens to be another great university like ours, maybe even ranked higher sometimes, but we're up there. Huge medical school. Okay, we have a great medical school, and so do they. In the middle of their medical school, they have an institute. It's a center. It's a division. It's called the Division of Perceptual Studies. Now, the Division of Perceptual Studies is kind of very carefully named division. And what do they study? Well, they study perception, right? Well, okay, what kind of perception? So here's the kind of perception they study, and this issues fatal challenges to the materialist scientific paradigm that consciousness in the human being can be explained only in terms of neurobiological phenomena. So in the 60s or something like that, there was a social service agency was getting reports of children who had vivid recall, what they claimed vivid perception of places they had never been, detailed perception of places they had never been, and they claimed to their parents that, yes, in a previous life, I lived in this place, and I knew, and they were describing scenery and like that. So the social service agency, they started getting these reports. They didn't know what to do. So they contacted a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia named Ian Stevenson. And as a good scientist, he said, well, we can disprove this. I mean, it's just like kids and their fantasies and this and that. And the next thing, we'll just disprove this. And it's like science will reign and everything like that. And so he would interview the kids, and it was like somehow, this is profound. And so then he would go to the locations that the kid claimed he or she had never been. And all of a sudden, this is getting a little troublesome. And then he started examining more cases. Then he started assembling teams of proper scientists who also came in with that intense skepticism. And then he realized that he started looking into the whole thing more deeply, and also models of consciousness that actually could accommodate that kind of thing. Now, the idea of rebirth or reincarnation, this is popularly termed, is something that actually is held by virtually every tradition across the globe, indigenous traditions, cultures in West and East, and even actually we're seeing some literature suggesting this is actually part of Christianity, because in the three Abrahamic religions, it's actually quite prominent. Christianity, people claim that no, it's like it doesn't work. It's like it kind of like upsets the whole sort of authority of the church. Actually, is what it upsets. And now we're seeing scholarship that strongly suggests that this was actually reincarnation. Was something. Reincarnation is the idea that there is something like the soul, which is a non-material spiritual personality, you might say, essence that inhabits a physical body. The physical body dies. Then the soul is eternal, immortal, and there's elaborate, especially in, say, Vedanta in India and also Tibetan Buddhist traditions, elaborate depictions of exactly the mechanics of this. It's like that matches in sophistication anything that we have in Western science, and there's a reason for this process, and it happens. So now we have anecdotal at this point. We have evidence. We don't have proof. Okay, we've got these little kids. It's like, what do we do? And so some rich person got wind of this and donated millions and millions of dollars. And now in the middle of the University of Virginia, they actually study this. And so here are some of the things that, that really make it compelling. Now, it's one thing for kids, like even if you have, like, by now there's certainly thousands of cases have been studied. You know, I talk about this in my creativity and consciousness class, and a couple of years ago, and there might even be somebody, you don't have to identify yourself, there might even be somebody who actually had this kind of experience as a child and was told, oh, you're just kind of, you know what parents tell kids, you know, it's like, you know, I had somebody in my class who had a little brother that actually had this experience. So here's why I think it's compelling. Because there's one thing, kids can say a lot of things. But when you have thousands of them, and you have teams of scientists going with their parents, like verifying the kid has never been here, kid is able to, there's going to be a white, you know, like a barn around the bend and all this, and actually remembering names of streets and all this kind of stuff. And this is pretty compelling. But the second thing is, in many of these cases, the kid would recall an accident or even the moment of their death, in which there was some kind of, like, sometimes it was like a physical accident, or sometimes, you know, could have been illness or something like this. And they would be born with a birthmark on their body that correlated very strongly with that event. So now you have two lines of corroboration that you have to deal with that reinforces the other. Now, I actually gave a little talk there about my work a couple of years ago at the center. But the first time I was there, when you walked in, I said they have all staff there, and it's all, you know, MDs and PhDs. And of course, you know, if you ask the University of Virginia Medical School, you know, administration, or probably most of the faculty, you know, well, what about the Division of Perceptual Studies? You know, make it go away. You know, it's that kind of thing. I was at a dinner party. People on the campus didn't even know it existed. So it's like crazy. Very poor improvising science, like when you're actually blocking off blocking off things that are uncomfortable. Okay, that's not profound science. Okay. But what was I going to say? Okay, so you walk into this building. So check this one out, and there's a kid there. A photo of a kid, 9-year-old boy, who was born with a. He's one of these kids, born with this like birthmark. It's like an inch wide that goes from like behind one ear all the way around the back of his head. It's like what kind of birthmark is that? And he's one of these kids that had a vivid recall of a head injury, and he had some kind of surgery or something like that, and he was born into this lifetime with a very powerful birthmark on that. And so the theory is that, and it's very consistent with, say, Eastern models of consciousness, is that there is some kind of, like human consciousness transcends the physical and is interactive with the physical. And when the soul takes on the body, it carries imprints in consciousness. So this flies in the face of, and again, is this proof? It is not proof that materialism is a hoax or a flawed, but it's profound evidence in support of that direction. And we always, scientists, from what I gather, I could totally be refuted by professional scientists in our midst, avoid the term proof. Use the term proof very, very carefully, okay? Evidence. So it's incredibly profound evidence that there's something happening in this direction. So there's two, okay, so in the academic community, you need to know this, okay? And again, you don't need to agree with it. You need to, you know, formulate your own position. But this is what I think you should know. That in terms of worldviews, there's two prominent worldviews about consciousness in the academy. And one is the reductionist viewpoint that I talked about, like Francis Crick saying, you are nothing but a pack of neurons. All this stuff is illusion. Religion, spirituality, it's a superstition. Humanity would do well to outgrow this because it's like a source of so many problems. Okay, so that's the viewpoint. Right? You got that down. All right. There's a more moderate form, that's a form of materialism because it's predicated on the fact that the physical substrate, neurobiology, the brain, no consciousness. Then there's a viewpoint, it's called epiphenomenalism, which basically means that consciousness, you can't reduce it to the brain. So somebody like a John Searle, a contemporary philosopher, would be an epiphenomenalist. So he's sparring, even within the materialist world, he's sparring with the materialist, the reductionist. He said, no, you can't, there's something about the human being that's too complex, too complicated, you can't reduce it to the neuronal. But still, consciousness emerges from the brain. So no brain, no consciousness. Okay, so those are two forms of materialism. So now what these reincarnation studies, and I'm going to give you one more example of another kind of study that was done in Princeton that also issues challenges of materialism. Lost my train of thought there, but those are two waves of materialist thought, and then so the reincarnation is actually suggestive of an entirely different model of consciousness in which, and if this holds, this is the biggest revolution in your lifetimes, our lifetimes. I know it's Friday, it's been a long week. Okay, so check this out. Okay, so I'm telling you what the biggest revolution in your lifetimes is going to be. And it's like in the wave pointing that direction. But it's prohibited in the academic world from circulating. Okay, we have a serious, serious problem. And that is that consciousness is primary to the physical. This is like so, when you look at it. Now, and then when you start going into now we're into radical stuff, okay? It's gonna, look. I've got tenure, so it's no problem. It's on video. It's like, I'm just getting to know Leah and everything like that. It's like somehow, she's, oh, I'm going to get him. Like, she can circulate it. I'm still covered. It'd be a little embarrassing, and stuff. Yeah, I haven't even used adult language yet, so it's like, and that may happen. But, and then when we get into the realm of radical stuff, so that's pretty radical. Consciousness is primary, the physical. That means that the human being is a manifestation of consciousness. The brain does not cause consciousness. You can have consciousness without a brain. Now, that's not to say that see, we're not talking about cognition. I'm not talking about the consciousness that says, am I going to go to the football game this? It's like Rutgers. Like, are we going to lose again? Okay, I'm not saying that is going to happen without a brain. But what I'm saying is that there is consciousness in the biggest sense, intelligence, without a brain. Okay, that's like radical step one.